In the autumn haze of 1871, deep in Jennings County, Indiana, a child arrived without words, without past, and some say without time. The Finch family, Miriam and Elijah, had taken him in. They were quiet people. She a seamstress, he a retired schoolmaster. No children of their own, no complaints to speak of, no complications until the boy. He never spoke, he never aged, and strangest of all, he never disobeyed. 2 years later, they gave him back. No allegations, no injury, no accusations of neglect or cruelty. Just a single line handwritten across the intake form like a quiet exhale, no longer compatible. Decades passed, and yet one prison intake sheet from nearly 40 years later lists a boy, same name, same face, still aged 9, still silent. Welcome to Sleepy History Tales. Like the video, and if you haven't yet, subscribe. You'll need a steady pulse for this one. And if you're listening now, tell me what country are you in and what time is it right now. There's comfort in knowing we're scattered across timelines, yet somehow watching the same story unfold together. Let's begin where the records begin. The first trace of the child appears in the Jennings County Orphan Intake Ledger Volume 4th page, 192. Male est, 8 to 9 years. No known origin. Delivered by circuit agent. No speech. No resistance. No name given. Just a placeholder. Child 13B. The delivery agent's signature is smudged, nearly illegible. But a looped G in agent matches the hand of a field supervisor stationed in Vernon that year. Oddly enough, his entire travel log for that week is missing. The Finch home on a lonely stretch of County Road 6 was listed as the placement residence. They were part of the state's post-war quiet residence incentive, which placed low-disruption wards in homes deemed intellectually and morally stable. The child appeared twice in the registry, the first time under 13B. 6 months later, same boy, same address, but listed as Unit 03V, revised. Different handwriting. Same ledger page, just 4 lines apart. And next to the second entry in faint red graphite appears same. Verify photograph. The first and only known photograph of the boy was found much later tucked inside a final inventory of the Finch estate. A stiff pose. Folded hands. Eyes averted slightly. No name. But the embossed seal on the back matches a photographer in Madison whose studio burned down in 1873 under unclear circumstances. No other images exist. Not in any bulletin. Not in any foster directory. The 1871 orphanage report doesn't mention any placement with the Finch family at all. And yet, Elijah Finch swore under oath that they received the child directly from the county post on July 7th. He even had paperwork and a food allowance slip to prove it. Curiously, Elijah's handwriting changes when referencing the boy. The loops shrink. The spacing stutters. In a personal journal from 1872, he wrote, "He does not speak. He does not cry. He knows when I enter. And he already sits upright. I have stopped knocking." Miriam Finch left behind no letters. But in her sewing journal tucked between patterns, there's a sketch labeled sleeve. Narrow. Boy. No measurements, just a quiet note. 3 done. Each the same. There were no reports of illness, no visits from inspectors, no accusations. Then suddenly, on October 12, 1873, he was returned. The form says, "Return reason, no longer compatible." No other child in the state's records is marked with that phrase. Not before, not after. The intake clerk, whose initials appear next to the note, later denied writing it. He didn't recognize the handwriting. And more troubling, his own ledger pages from that week were torn out. A second intake sheet was generated that same day. Same child, same birth estimate, same photograph glued to a new form. This time under a new name, Eli Morris, assigned to Jefferson County. But there's no transfer paperwork, no record of where he went, no family signed for him. Only a fading line scribbled years later in water-damaged blue ink. He did not ask to return. He was only delivered. The Finch home, nestled on the edge of Ewing Hollow, was modest. Clapboard walls, 2 rooms deep. Low porch rails painted in hand-mixed off-white. No significant repairs were recorded between 1864 and 1879. Property logs confirm Elijah and Miriam never moved. They never stopped paying taxes. They lived quiet, sober lives by all official accounts. The 1871 census lists them with a single dependent ward. No name, no birth date, no schooling status. The speech impairment column is checked, but the note lacks a physician's signature, and no inspectors ever flagged the household for concern. There were no broken windows, no damaged furniture, no visits logged by the Child Welfare Office. However, the inspector's spring notes for that year, pages 7 through 9, were later found torn out with no replacement ever filed. You're still with me, right? Take a breath. We've barely scratched the surface. This boy, this ageless, voiceless ward wasn't just a story passed down in whispers. He was logged, documented, moved, and then moved again. But somehow, he always stayed the same. And the real mystery, he didn't vanish. He just kept reappearing. Stay tuned for part 2. And as always, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. Because somewhere, someone else just hit play at the exact same moment. Maybe they're closer to this story than we think. The only known observation of the boy's behavior outside of state records comes not from an official, but from a neighbor. A single line in a condolence letter dated September 1873. The quiet one still walks your garden row like a shadow at attention. The line is offhand, almost poetic. But it's the only surviving domestic comment ever made about the child. After the Finches passed quietly without heirs, their belongings were sold off piecemeal in the spring of 1882. What little remained was boxed and donated to the First Baptist Church, where it sat forgotten in a cedar trunk until 1948. Inside that trunk, a stitched calfskin diary, unmarked and untitled. It belonged to Miriam Finch. The handwriting inside was tight compressed. The entries mostly mundane weather updates, sewing patterns, cornmeal tallies, the occasional measurement for Elijah's trousers. But from March 1872 to April 1873, something changed. 17 entries, each one referencing the child not by name but through presence. March 3rd. He rises before the stove is lit. April 12th. The door stays closed, but sometimes the candle goes out. May 28th. He doesn't speak but nods before I ask. His eyes rest between mine and the wall. July 9th. I gave him a book. He didn't look, just opened it halfway and held it there until the room felt wrong. One entry, undated, faint, and written in graphite, floats eerily between two torn pages. He knows when we look away. That's when the room changes. Not big, but enough. By fall, the entries grow shorter. From October to February, she stops referring to him directly. Room already swept. No dust on his shoes. Firewood moved. No sound. And then, in April, it ends. The final line, standing alone at the bottom of an otherwise empty page. He began to blink in patterns. No punctuation. No follow-up. The pages after it are blank. But there was something else hidden, where no one thought to look. Glued beneath the back cover, lining under the seam of the binding, was a small paper slip. It wasn't found until nearly 75 years later by a church historian, steaming the diary open for cataloguing. The slip bore 3 faded words, still not assigned. The words were written in a different hand. No one knows whose. The child's official return was filed on October 14, 1873, under Form B-17 in the Jennings County Orphan Registry. The form is ordinary. Standard notations, routine codes, no mention of illness, no signs of injury, no behavioral flags. Foster parents Elijah and Miriam Finch. Placement code 03V. The child's name left blank. Then we reach the cause of return line. One word. Written in slate pencil, compatibility. No explanation. No regulation clause. No footnote. That word compatibility does not exist in any known Indiana Orphan Bureau vocabulary from the era. At the time, the state allowed several approved return causes: illness, abuse, developmental deviation, lack of moral influence, unsuitable demeanor. Compatibility wasn't one of them. The logbook for that week, handwritten by Clark Daniel Remley, lists the intake as routine. But a red pencil correction in the margin beside the word adds a curious note. Not language of this office, possibly transcription error, initialed DR. The Finch return form unsigned. But there's a faint check mark next to the word approved. Not in Remley's hand. Weeks later, the state's Eastern Placement Oversight Committee requested clarification. Jennings County responded on November 2nd. Attached was the same unsigned return form and a note from Deputy Registrar Hollis Carr. No complaint issued. No marks. No evidence of neglect. Child was described as quiet, unassertive, non-injurious. Request for retrieval was voluntary. No statement from Mrs. Finch. The note is formal, dry, procedural, but it does not include the word compatibility, which means that word may have been added after the return by someone else outside the usual channels. In 1884, a minor investigation into historical anomalies in state fostering brought Carr back in front of a county panel. Under oath, he stated, "I do not recall authoring that term, nor do I recall approving it in any prior case." His testimony was accepted. No follow-up was made. In 1901, the orphan files, including the Finch folder, were transferred to the newly formed State Record Archive in Indianapolis. There, archivists noticed something strange. The line for cause of return had been erased. Barely. You could still see it. Someone had written over the erasure in graphite ill-defined. But when examined with infrared in 1946, analysts confirmed what lay beneath. The word was still there, ghost-like, but intact compatibility. No other return form between 1870 and 1880 uses that word. Not even once. A linguistic survey conducted in 1972 looked for regional uses of compatibility in legal, medical, or religious contexts from the time. Nothing. Not a whisper. There is one final note. On the back of the Finch return form, folded vertically down the edge, there's a short, near invisible line written sideways in lighter ink. It does not match any other handwriting on the form. But it reads, he could not match. He only mirrored. A transfer sheet dated November 3rd, 1873, reassigned subject 03V to a new home, a foster residence in Ripley County. And just like that, he was gone again. But not erased. Only reassigned. Still listening. You've made it this far. And the pattern's starting to show itself, isn't it? This child wasn't lost. He was moved again and again. But he never truly changed. And the systems around him, they bent. They redacted. They looked away. Because he didn't cause chaos. He just made things not fit, like a mirror, like a misprint, like something that watches more than it lives. Let me know, are you still here? Drop your location and time again. Because somewhere across the world, someone else is watching this with you. And maybe, just maybe, they've seen him too. After Jennings County signed the boy away, his name changed again, Eli Morris. This time it appears in a single record in the rear folio of the Jennings Orphanage quarter book, beneath a wax seal cracked neatly down the middle. Receiving family, George and Henrietta. Lyle's occupation milling. Address, Township 5 Lot, 112, Ripley County. But the intake box, the space that confirms safe arrival, was left blank. No initials, no checkmark, no ink. The name Eli Morris appears for the first time here. It had not been used in any document before. The boy had no last name until someone gave him one. The seal was red wax but half pressed, as if the hand signing off didn't finish the motion. And the Lyles. They never existed. Not in the 1870 census, not in 1875, not in any tax receipts, property ledgers, voter rolls, or residency surveys in Township 5. Not once. The deed for Lot 112, filed 5 years earlier, lists a widowed Lutheran, Anna G. Rausch, as owner. Her probate case had closed the lot due to abandonment after a fire loss. Her name was struck through in blue pencil. Next to it, a single marginal note, pending correction. No party present. The lot was never resold. And one page from that year's deed, ledger torn. Line 9 ends mid-sentence, followed by 3 blank lines. Then, silence. In January 1874, a state census enumerator visited the address listed for the Lyles. He found nothing. His return log reads, structure unoccupied, foundation only, minor frame remains. No response to call. He even drew a small map. Lot 112 sketched in pale pencil. The crumbling structure was labeled with a single word, partial, and yet, on that same form, the box for fostered youth present was checked, then crossed out. A month later, Back at the State Office of Child Assignment, a ledger clerk filed a complaint. The issue, the Lyles never returned the mandatory 60-day placement form. A note was stapled to the boys' folder. Reassignment pending. Await confirmation of resident and/or contact. No confirmation ever arrived. Jennings Orphanage responded by doubling down. Child was lawfully transferred. Delivery confirmed by courier log. Subject left county jurisdiction on date specified. Further inquiries fall to Ripley administration. When Ripley officials requested that courier log, it could not be found. Only a payment stub remained. $200 issued to Helene for single passenger delivery, full term. No other trips under that name were logged. No second courier. No return fare. Just one ride, one child. Years later, a Ripley County school register dated spring 1874 shows a single entry. Eli M., age 9. He was enrolled for 2 weeks in a rural schoolhouse near the edge of Township 5. His name appears once. Week 2. The name is crossed out with a side notation. Family relocated. No mention of Lyles, no guardianship. Just another blank. In the teacher's own marginalia, scribbled in the bottom right corner. Uncle unclear if he spoke. Another document. One that wasn't meant to survive. It sat buried at the bottom of the county clerk's surplus file in a section marked for voided land claims. There one line, unsigned, simple, reclaimed by absence. It listed the same parcel. Lot 112. No names, no dispute, just gone. Then, in 1947, during a routine audit of legacy orphan cases long after the counties had been reorganized, the files sent to Indianapolis for consolidation, a cabinet card was discovered. A small photograph, roughly 4x 6 inches, tucked between 2 folded bills of lading inside a manila envelope marked Finch, Odintion 7173. The envelope was tied with cotton twine that had long since dried into a stiff knot. The image showed a boy seated on a velvet parlor chair, left hand resting on one knee, eyes angled off-center. He wore a plain buttoned shirt. The collar lay flat. There was no label, no name, no date. But under oblique light, faint graphite impressions became visible on the back. Subject 03V or 13B, the handwriting uncertain. Below that, in blue ink, someone else wrote, returned photo unsigned. The studio was hard to trace. No emblem, no embossing. But the background, a floral curtain, a bentwood chair, a parlor column, matched a known ad for Tolbert Brothers Studio operating out of Madison. They had burned down in 1873. Their records were lost with the building. As part of a preservation initiative, the photograph was tested. What it revealed, we'll talk about next. Still with me. If you are, take a second, breathe. This part of the story gets colder. Not scarier exactly, just quieter. And sometimes that's worse. And hey, what time is it now? Where you are. Drop it in the comments. Country and hour. Someone else may be watching this exact moment with you, sitting in the same quiet, wondering, where did he go next? Because this child, he didn't disappear. He was delivered and then mirrored, but never matched. The photograph should have crumbled. 80 years. That's how long it had been stored, unsealed, exposed to the open air. And yet, not a trace of decay, no yellowing, no silvering along the edges, no chemical cracks in the emulsion that time usually carves into such things. The corners of the cardstock remained unnervingly sharp. Even under bright exposure, the image didn't haze or fade, it held. In 1953, a curious technician at the Indiana State Historical Laboratory ran a spectrographic analysis on the card. It was catalogued quietly under file 4152A. The official language is clinical, almost cold. Photograph displays no measurable deterioration. Protein binding layer intact. Cellulose fibers show no insect abrasion, no fungal presence. Pigment density consistent with recent manufacture. But what stood out, what slipped past the margins of the report, was a handwritten note scribbled at the bottom. Image has not changed. Impossible. And that wasn't even the part that frightened the archivists most. When enlarged under a lens, the boy's face in the photograph was unsettling in its clarity. Every feature, every detail refused to blur with time. Lips pressed tightly together, one ear slightly higher than the other. A faint crescent-shaped birthmark just beneath his collarbone. His eyes, wide and fixed, didn't simply reflect the light, they seemed to absorb it. One lab assistant whispered that under red light in the dark room, the eyes almost pulled the light inward, as if still hungry for it. He never included that in his report. Side-by-side comparisons were conducted against known entries in the Ripley County assignment file. The same boy appeared again in a second image taken 14 months after the first, and yet, no growth, no change. Same collar, same posture. The mole on the cheekbone hadn't moved, and the shoes half visible in the lower right of the frame still bore the same scuff marks in the same places. When both images were tested under UV degradation, the modern control image faded as expected, but the original it darkened for a moment and then returned to its prior clarity. The technician who performed that test quietly requested reassignment 2 days later. In the bottom drawer of the photo case, they later found a note. Folded, unsigned. It read, "He was not captured. He was still being rendered." Let that settle for a moment. Now let's talk about the intake record. In 1891, the Clark County Correctional Ledger lists a detainee under the case number 764B. A boy, no surname, just Eli M. He had been picked up outside the Jeffersonville depot for loitering near a produce cart. No resistance, no words. The arresting officer estimated his age at 9. Height 4'5", weight 74 pounds. Skin pale, eyes grey. But it's the next part that caught the historian's attention. Subject shows no signs of confusion or distress. Compliant but mute. Attached to the intake form was a gelatin silver photograph waxed neatly into the top right corner. The image, slightly blurred at the left temple, shows a boy in a flat-collared shirt turned slightly to the left, hands folded in lap. Beneath it, a chilling annotation image taken at time of processing. Plate preserved. The handwriting doesn't match any other entries from that month. And here's where it gets even stranger. Because 30 years before that intake, an almost identical image had been logged in Jennings County. It had been attached to a Finch return reassignment file. Subject code 03V. When the Clark County Archive was eventually merged with the State Juvenile Registry in 1964, the two images were digitized side by side. An archivist flagged them. Same face, same crease in the collar. Even the angle of the light was identical. Now, just between us, how many 9-year-old boys do not change after 3 decades? How many photos separated by 30 years show no variation in physical development? None. Except one. There was no birth certificate attached to the 1891 file. No guardian listed. He was held for 12 days before being transferred to the Cold Hollow State Reformatory. His file was marked Silent Juvenile. On the transfer form dated March 30, 2 signatures appear, one from Warden C.A. Memk and another from a deputy who years later would swear under oath that he never signed it. The ink was too thick. The capital M was shaped wrong. Someone else, someone using his name, had finalized the transfer. Cold Hollow Reformatory, Upper West Block. That's where Eli was placed. The nurse's log entries are brief, repetitive, entirely compliant. Poor appetite, never speaks, blinks regularly when prompted. But one note scrawled in the margin of the health chart has haunted many since pulse even. Body temperature cooler than expected. Flesh cold, but not clammy. Cold, but not dead. Still, but not lifeless. What do you think? Listener, was Eli real? Or was he something rendered as the note suggested, an image caught mid-formation, not meant for our world, but somehow fixed in it? Stay with us. There's more to Eli's file. And Cold Hollow had many rooms. Not all of them stayed closed. He was never enrolled in any educational programming. Not once. Instead, he was given light maintenance tasks, quiet, inconsequential. Jobs that wouldn't be noticed if left undone. And in fact, he wasn't noticed at all. His file shows no discipline reports, no medical interventions, no conversations documented, no injuries recorded. A lone, undated memo from a weary staff member reads, "You wouldn't know he was there if not for the uniform." Then in December of 1892, he vanished. Not dramatically, not in a way that sparked alarm. His name was simply removed from the active roster. No incident report, no discharge form, no transfer slip. Where the final status line should have been, there was only a single red pencil dash. Nothing more. A small cryptic annotation beneath it reads, "File recorded plate retained. The photograph remained inside the file until 1951, almost 60 years later, when the State Archive initiated a preservation review. An archivist noted something unusual. The image had not faded. The paper had not yellowed. The wax seal was still pliable, like it had been pressed that morning. And when they compared it with the 1871 photograph from Jennings County, every crease, every shadow, every thread of the shirt was exactly the same. Nothing had changed. Nothing. At the bottom of the 1891 intake, form almost invisible, unless under angled light, were 4 faint indentations, not written in ink, but embedded from the pressure of a page above. A ghost of handwriting. They read, "Age confirmed, not time." Let's pause a moment. What do you suppose that means? He had been registered only as inmate 187. No surname, no family origin, no attached conviction record. The first trace of him appears in the Cold Hollow State Reformatory Register, dated April 2nd, 1891, transferred from Clark County Detention. His listed age 9. Mute, neutral behavior. No violence, no disruption. The intake photograph, still preserved under glass in the warden's casebook, shows a boy sitting motionless, expressionless, his gaze overcast, not uncommon for institutional portraits of the era. But one thing stood out: the crease in his shirt, identical to the 1871 photo from Jennings County. Down to the thread. Cell block B logs confirm the boy never spoke. Not once. Guards changed quarterly, but across entries in 5 different handwriting styles. One thing remained constant. No complaints, no noise, no verbal expression. One night, shift officer scribbled in the margins. He blinks when addressed, slowly, deliberate. Another entry from June 1892 adds, eyes open at every check. Even at 3:00 a.m., standard meal records show his food tray often returned untouched or half-eaten. Yet, he never lost weight. His caloric intake was well below the mandated minimum. Still, he never grew weaker. In fact, he never changed. Medical forms from 1893 list his weight the same as at intake. A nurse's side note scribbled faintly in the corner simply says, skin cold, responds to pressure, no lesions, fingernails unbroken. Then later in a shakier pencil, does not shiver. No apparent sleep cycles. Psychological evaluations rotated yearly as required. Yet, despite dozens of pages of assessments, he was never reclassified, never transferred, never released. Designations ranged from nonverbal passive disorder to catatonic mimicry. One bold evaluator even wrote intact cognition, unknown restraint. Still nothing changed. In the 1899 institutional summary, Warden Clarence A. Mercier wrote, Subject 187 remains without incident or disciplinary need. No family, no visitors, no history, just silence. Mercier retired the following year. His successor, W. Fenley Brooks, later testified under federal inquiry that he once tried to remove 187's bunk during a capacity reshuffle in 1902. The mattress resisted. The fabric lining wouldn't fold. When they finally pulled it back, a fine layer of dust revealed an uneven grid of vertical impressions, as though something or someone had pressed repeatedly into the frame. He ordered the cot left undisturbed. No photographs were taken. The final mention of 187 appears in a routine janitorial log from February 1904. A bunk inventory list simply marked his frame vacant, but the corresponding intake sheet still in place. No incident, no departure notice, no formal discharge. The line item for his ID ends mid-sentence. 3 blank rows follow, and beneath them in red ink, distinct from the black used throughout the rest of the ledger, no release form. Status held open. When the files were digitized in 1971, the intake folder for 187 was missing. In its place, archivists found a plain envelope labeled non-adult inactive. Inside, a blank ledger card, but across the top, faintly impressed into the pulp, not with ink but with pressure, likely decades old, were 3 barely visible words: kept, not kept, still recorded. In 1928, the Indiana Bureau of Records launched a pilot program to locate misfiled or anomalous orphan records using newly developed forensic techniques. They hoped handwriting analysis, pigment dating, and record sequencing might bring clarity. They had no idea what they were walking into. What happened to inmate 187? Or perhaps a better question, friends, was he ever meant to leave? We'll explore what the Bureau found and what they failed to explain in the next section. But for now, rest gently and maybe double-check that your records haven't disappeared. The Finch document had been removed from the main archives during a routine inventory, an unusual absence of household information, and an odd, untitled photograph. So rare, in fact, that the archivist had to go through the entire old catalogue. The file had carried 3 different numbers throughout its life: subject 03 Jennings County Fee, Elim Ripley, and inmate 187 Cold Hollow. Although consolidated into a single volume since 1906, each page showed signs of inconsistency. The dates were inconsistent, the language was uneven, and the writing style was not consistent. Was it intentional confusion? Or something else? In September 1928, handwriting expert Lauren Cray, under the National Archives Comparative Scriptorum Special Project, was asked to examine the ink prints to rule out forgery. He begins with a mild conclusion. The documents are inconsistent in form, but then Cray moves on to a group of additional documents never formally entered into the Finch file, and from there, things start to change. A transfer note dated November 30, 1873 is written by 7 different people, or at least 7 different handwritings. But what's troubling is not just the number, but the way the strokes lack the real movement of a human hand. A line next to the child's name reads, "Returned, due to compatibility error," written in a typeface that mimics Clark's curved strokes, but with reversed ink pressure heavy at the end, rather than the tip as a real person would write. Below, another line in sharp straight strokes reads, "Signed W.O. Match." Cray circles that line and notes, "Not a font, not calligraphy, but something deliberately created but of no origin. Have you ever seen writing and couldn't figure out who wrote it?" A comparison document from the Jennings orphanage in the same drawer showed intake signatures from the 1870s, all of which had been verified in a 1913 corruption case. But none of the handwriting matched the Finch records. No heading, no signature, no initials. Cray wrote in the margin of his 3rd page, "If this is a human hand, it does not appear on any other county document." The ink test was even more puzzling. Common 19th century iron gallon ink turned a rusty brown when exposed to ammonia fumes. But the ink in the Finch notes did the opposite. It went from black to dark blue to crimson. The archivist noted in his procedure log, ink of notes seeps through to back not main text. Completely dry. Cray traced the identities of the 3 clerks who had signed the original entry page: A. Romley, H.K. Nash, T. Wills. But none of them had any records of employment before 1875. They only appeared later in the estate and cemetery lists, and strangely, their birth and death years did not match between records. Notably, Nash, who was supposed to have signed in 1873, had died in 1872, according to the Mooney burial permit. A final note, written by Cray himself, was found in a coat pocket at the back of the file. Just 3 lines underlined twice. No signatures are the same, no handwriting is repeated. Only the child is consistent, and he does not write. Do you feel the chill? A file with no writer, no signer, no ink to match the era. There is only a child, always present in every version. The original adoption record, dated August 6, 1871, was one of dozens processed that month in Jennings County. It contained the usual information: child number, adoption stamp sponsor's name, and a final signature from Enoch Belma, who had served as clerk for more than 12 years without fail. The certificate was written in clear black ink E. Belma thin-lined linen paper, watermarked by the Indiana Record Supply Company, standard form from 1867 to 1873. The main page read, "Male parents unknown. Quiet assigned to the Finch home under temporary order 27C. A red line in the margin read, "Fit for adoption. Health verified." 3 lines below, that the last, "No objection from family." That line alone was circled in pencil on the 1902 audit, an investigation triggered by an anonymous letter alleging irregularities in the juvenile immigration history at Cold Hollow. At that point, the former clerks were contacted to confirm. Belma, now retired and living in Madison, Indiana, filed an affidavit dated March 9, 1902, stating, "I do not recall any such record. I never arranged for a child to bear the name Finch. If my name appears on a document, it was not written by my hand." The coroner's office compared Belma's handwriting to 86 other documents: marriage licenses, death certificates, land records. Every sample matched perfectly. The curves, the slant, the signature double L. So, who signed his name? Who wrote it with those unhuman pens, and who? Is this kid who doesn't speak or write? Thanks for following Sleepy History Tales. What do you think really happened in the Finch files? Let us know in the comments. And if you get chills down your spine, you're not alone. The signature on the Finch file was exactly the same as the one found earlier. The same elaborate comma on the B, the same vague hesitation in the dash of the T in Clark. When shown a copy of the document, Belma, who had been a registrar, stared at it for 3 minutes without saying a word. Then, almost lost in thought, he said, "I don't remember the name, but it's my handwriting." When pressed about whether he might have forgotten the child, Belma did not reply with a denial. He simply said, "It's not forgetting, it's not existing. I've handled thousands of files. I remember the feeling when a piece of paper actually passed through my hands. This one never did." Nevertheless, Belma's statement was stamped and filed under objection number 12A. What's remarkable is that the original document was not withdrawn from the archives. Instead, there was only an administrative note written on the last page of the register. Signature authentic, memory unconfirmed. The signatory was a scribe named R.H. Kemps, who would later lose his son at Cold Hollow Correctional Facility 11 years later. No changes had been made to the original record. Everything was left intact in the ledger. But if you turn the pages, between the layers of paper that had faded with age, you could see very slight indentations as if the pen had lingered too long at the same spot. Not letters, not numbers. Just pressure. Over and over again, as if the person who had signed something else, somewhere deeper in the book. In November 1910, the Jennings County Courthouse began a 3-month heating upgrade. The old iron fireplace, installed in 1864 but abandoned since 1901, was scheduled for demolition. While breaking up the east sandstone foundation, 2 masons discovered a shallow opening near the foundation wall near an unused ash pipe. Inside, they found a steel box wedged between brick and wood beam. The edge of the box was scorched unlabeled and had no file number. The lock had rusted from the inside. When they pried open the lid, there was only a single hand-bound notebook, the spine cracked, the cover untitled. The notebook had only 4 pages. The first 3 were completely blank, water-stained, spotted. But the 4th page contained a single line written in the middle of the page. Subject: male juvenile Finch filer. No date, no receipt code. The handwriting was not traditional handwriting. It was cold, mechanical, as if written by a machine. Under status, there was only one word: suspended in compliance. No one named Clark signed it. No further lines. The notebook was taken to Clark John Harrow's office for evaluation. He noted its existence in the discovery register, but marked it as non-conforming, a term for documents that did not match any standard state index or file form. In an internal memo dated December 4, 1910, Harrow wrote, "No authorization, not in official form, not in source depository." But he didn't destroy it. The book was packed up, taken to the courthouse basement, and filed under the heading Foreign Objects, Fireplace Wall. 2 years later, a state archivist examining the Jennings County adoption transfer books for 1873 noticed an anomaly. The book ended on page 402 correct, but the spine contained 403 pages. The last page was completely blank, but if you looked closely, you could see ink smearing from the back, indicating that something had been pressed against it for a long time. The faint, square imprints suggested some cardboard object had been pressed against it, casting shadows on the paper. The examiner's margin note simply read, "Transfer page not in sync. Paper off register." When the Finch file was removed from its binder for further examination, a dark stain was found in the upper right corner. The oddity, there were no other stains. Just that one. A 1936 ink and ash test confirmed. The stain was coal ash, the same composition as that used in the 1864 fireplace. A letter from the court's 1911 maintenance report shows that a mason had submitted a handwritten complaint. "Nobody told us the box was sealed in the wall. Had to break it open to get it out. It didn't move like metal. It was soft, like damp cloth. There was no smell of paper inside, but of burning oil." The foreman dismissed the complaint. The item was recorded boxed up and never mentioned again. No one knew who had put the book behind the wall. No trace of a locking mechanism, no name, no engineering plan. But someone had written it, and someone, before the courthouse was even built, had made the decision. Compatible can be suspended, but not revoked. The deposition was never made public. It lay undisclosed under a state archive seal for 68 years, until 1979, when an archivist misidentified the file and accidentally exposed it during an audit of backlogs. The file was labeled simply Deposition of Warden L. Prata, Prisoner A, 1987. The 6-page deposition was read aloud but never notarized. Leonard Prata had been the Clark County Jail's warden for 3 decades. He retired in 1912 and only gave the deposition more than 20 years later from a sanitarium in Vanzin, where he was being treated for hand tremors and nocturnal paralysis. In the deposition, Prata tells of a prisoner admitted on May 3, 1891. The admission form does not list the parents, but there is a photograph attached, remarkable for its integrity. No ink chips, No decay like the cellulose photographs of the time. The boy is described as not aging. 9 years old. Quiet. No behavioral problems. Do you see anything wrong here? We have more to tell. There are pages that no one has dared to turn. If you are listening to this story tonight, please leave a sign, so I know you saw what I saw. We will continue. There was no mention of a criminal record before the theft accusation that brought him in. His cell was marked permanent interim, a term invented by Prata himself, used for inmates not yet assigned to a final block because of pending identification. But in this boy's case, that status never changed. 13 years, unmoved, untouched. Prata wrote, he was no burden. He did not speak, he did not act out, and yet no one visited him, no one filed for him, and no parole officer was ever assigned. Every 6 months I'd file a report and reclassify him. Every 6 months I'd ask who he belonged to. The system gave no answer. And then in 1903 something shifted. He was still just a number subject 187 when he was sent to infirmary isolation for refusing food for 9 days. A nurse assigned to monitor his decline reported that he mouthed something at her. She couldn't make out the word. When Prata asked him to repeat it, the boy didn't move his lips. He just blinked 118 times. The nurse counted aloud, tick by tick, blinking in rhythm. When she reached the final number, she dropped her notebook. Prata said he thought it might have been a seizure, but the boy wasn't shaking. He just stared at him, unmoving, unafraid, just watching. I don't know what I saw in that look, Prata wrote, but I filed a false log saying he had been transferred to mental observation. He hadn't been. I just couldn't keep writing the same reports with no answer. Prata didn't sleep that night or the next. And then 1 year later, the boy's roster line ended. Just like that. No release, no death certificate, no transfer order. Only a blank space and the stamp reclassification pending. On the final page of Prata's sworn statement, there's a scribbled note. The handwriting doesn't match his. It reads, it was not a word, it was a number. No one has ever deciphered what 118 meant. No other inmate in Indiana's system was ever given the designation permanent interim. And the ink used in that margin, it didn't match any known manufacturer in Indiana or any neighboring state from that year. Would you have kept looking? Would you have tried to blink back? The language of 19th century child welfare was clinical, circular, cold. Labels like imbecilic, morally wayward, feeble-minded, they weren't true diagnoses. They were gates, methods to slot children into predetermined outcomes. But this child, the one returned by the Finch family, fit none of those terms. In his reassignment, record dated July 3, 1873, the attending physician marked all 3 required fields: aptitude, behavioral risk, and prognosis, with the same cold note, NA, not applicable. That notation is common in gaps of documentation, but less common was its repetition. It appeared on 3 separate intake surveys filed over several months, all from different staff, different initials, same 3 letters, NA, and none of them used past tense. In the 1874 Jennings County Orphanage Census, he is listed under a supplemental heading, Deferred Classification. 8 children were on that list. 7 were later transferred. Only the Finch boy stayed behind. Quarter after quarter, his file was stamped re-evaluation recommended, but no one ever followed through. On the margin of the 1875 roster, someone had scribbled in faded ink, "Still on file, still waiting placement, still not crying." He wasn't disruptive, he wasn't scared, he wasn't even sad. And that, ironically, is what left him stranded. Because in a system that only responded to problems, a child who didn't react simply didn't register. In 1881, Indiana introduced a new psychological standards review board. When they reviewed archived cases, the Finch boy was flagged under a strange new heading, cognitively inert minors. Status ambiguous. In the report, Dr. Luther Shaw wrote, "Subject does not respond to linguistic stimuli, but is not deaf. Exhibits no resistance but cannot be taught. Breath patterns remain unchanged under stress. His condition is neither mutism nor defiance. He is not simple. He is not still. He is just not aligned." That final sentence was crossed out in pencil. Beneath it faintly, he blinks in order. Let that settle for a moment. When Indiana passed the 1883 Uniform Child Welfare Mandate, hundreds of forgotten or improperly classified children were re-evaluated. Files were shuffled, standards tightened. But the Finch boy's file, it was marked simply reviewed. No revision necessary. By then, he had not moved, not spoken, not required any care note for more than a decade. But he remained in state custody, still housed, still observed. That same year, a printed update to the mandate added a single clause under Section 12 Subclause D subjects lacking developmental velocity without accompanying illness or disorder shall remain on holding rolls until such time as mobility or decline justifies reassessment. No other child met that condition. That clause was quietly removed 4 years later. In 1938, decades after the Finch boy had last been seen, researchers at the Indiana Institute of Public Records were combing through files. A storm had damaged the second floor of the Welfare Records Annex, and as they sorted wet ledgers from 1894, they came across something strange. A folder, no official catalog stamp, 2 red marks on the outside, not in catalog. No diagnosis warranted. Inside, only a crease in the paper and a final note, scrawled hurriedly by an unknown hand. Still present, but we cannot say where. Are you still with us? Do you think he ever left? Or was he never meant to? Let us know what you believe, but don't blink too many times in a row. Someone might be counting. The basement vaults had long since surrendered to time and water. Decades earlier, a storm had ruptured the sub-foundation of the old records building, soaking shelves that had once held the full weight of Indiana's forgotten children. Thousands of documents were reclassified as salvage boxed without ceremony and left to rot in bureaucratic purgatory. One of those boxes, L147B, didn't exist on any inventory list. Inside, sealed beneath dry, crumbling masking tape, was a single transfer envelope. It bore the faded insignia of the Indiana Child Welfare Division and was marked for internal reassignment per state protocol. Strangely, the paper was pristine. No yellowing, no warping. The ink hadn't bled despite being part of the flood salvage. And yet, it was wrong. The envelope didn't follow format. It had no watermarks, no official routing slips, just 2 things. A date, October 8th, 1935, and a name Finch, just Finch. No first name, no case number, no guardian, no intake registry. Across the top, in sharp, deliberate block, letters, not cursive, which was standard at the time it read. Return subject. Finch compatibility. Cycle incomplete. The line that should have held a forwarding address, it didn't exist. Instead, it simply read, return to loop. What does that even mean? Block lettering in this style wasn't used by clerks. It was unfamiliar. No staff samples from the period matched it. But even more unsettling was the verification stamp affixed at the bottom, the required signature of a regional welfare supervisor, stamped neatly in bold ink. Approved T. Lemley, regional supervisor. But here's the problem. T. Lemley died in 1931, 4 years before this form was signed. Death certificate 7888113 confirms it. Pulmonary embolism, May 14, 1931. Burial Summit Hill Cemetery. And yet, this document is stamped October 8, 1935. 4 years after Lemley was buried. How is that possible? The ink analyzed decades later showed high carbon sediment and animal-based glue, a composition consistent with 19th century ink no longer manufactured after 1902. No other department stamp from that time bore its chemical signature. Attached to the envelope was a 1956 memo from a baffled supervisor asking whether to escalate or discard the file. No response was ever recorded. No initials. No final verdict. But one thing was scribbled barely legible in faint pencil, tucked into the document's margin using an obscure form of clerk's shorthand. If reassigned again, pull oldest first. Do not forward past cycle. That phrase, past cycle, does not exist in any Indiana procedural manual. Not then, not now. When an archivist tried scanning the document in 1971, something stranger happened. The scanner jammed, not once permanently. The feed burned slightly along the edge, the rollers stopped mid-motion. And on the technician's error report, feed error, loop detected. Page attempted return to tray. That wasn't a software error. That was something else. By 1974, the Bureau of Child Welfare Modernization began digitizing the 19th century orphan intake files. It was supposed to be routine, fast, clean, but one name wouldn't auto-index. It came up again and again. Finch, no given name. He was everywhere and nowhere. That same entry appeared 12 times in county inventories, 9 times in prison archives, and twice at the same time in reassignment ledgers dated 2 years apart. Always with the same file number 8271443, but never in the same place twice. The classifications shifted, reintegrated, pending, reassigned. Never deceased, never closed. His age last updated in 1873. Then crossed out, then rewritten, then left blank. In one ledger, someone wrote in red, "Hold status until observation." No signature, no follow-up. An audit in 1938 described the folder as active despite inactivity. In 1952, entry maintained by rotation, not by need. By 1961, subject referred without reference. What does that even mean? Most child records were moved once, maybe twice. Finch's file moved 114 times. Between 1871 and 1950. No transfer requests, no signatures, facilities signed off without ever receiving a child. One note from a clerk in Ripley County, 1927 read, "File here again. Not sure why. Let it rest this time. Some staff whispered it was a ghost file, a bureaucratic echo looping endlessly. Others thought someone was misusing the number. Just lazy data entry. But then came the photograph. In 1970, while cross-referencing incarceration logs from 1891 to 1904, a state researcher found something chilling: a cabinet card. The same image used in the Finch estate archives. The boy hadn't aged, not a day. Same eyes, same clothing, same faint crease near his left ear. Unaged, uncreased, unduplicated. A single boy unchanged across 20 years. Then came the final attempt, a purge of inactive records in 1975. Finch's file triggered a system-wide freeze. The error ticket printed one unreadable line after another until the final message appeared. System memory not lost. It is being rewritten. Who is Finch? Where did he go? And, more chillingly, is he still in the system? Sleepy History Tales invites you to wonder not just about ghosts in the archives, but ghosts in the code. Have you ever tried deleting something that refuses to be forgotten? We'll continue soon. The last physical record connected to the Finch boy came in quietly unnoticed during the 1983 transfer of surplus case files from the shuttered Jennings County Orphan Bureau. It wasn't catalogued, didn't carry a standard folder number. Just a linen tab, marked with a single horizontal black line. Inside, 27 blank pages, unbound. No paper clips, no tags, no cover sheet. Only fragile blot paper between each leaf untouched since the day they were filed. No names, no dates, no annotations. Just a silence sealed in inches of bureaucratic storage. It wasn't until 1992, during a mundane inventory audit, that someone truly looked. Archivist Dana Ellsworth, under the flicker of a halogen lamp, lifted the final page to the light. The paper grain looked ordinary until she noticed it. A faint line of discoloration along the bottom edge. She magnified the section. A sentence. Invisible to the naked eye, it was written in a hand so small it seemed woven into the fibers. Not on top, not beneath, but somehow within. There was no ink bleed, no pressure trace from a pen above, no signature. The ink defied chemical analysis. The lab returned it with a cryptic note. No traceable compounds. Impressions suggest upward pressure from beneath the paper. That single phrase, the only text across the entire file, triggered an internal investigation. But the origin of the file remained elusive. It wasn't in the National Orphan Archive. It hadn't been submitted through any known state process. One theory held it was accidentally included from another jurisdiction, but the blotting paper bore a faint Indiana state seal watermark, dated 1870. Another theory proposed it was a decoy, a manufactured folder built to obscure improper transfers. But even that couldn't explain the fingerprints. On the folder's inner tab, archivists discovered partial prints. Small, oily, child-sized, and not a single match in the juvenile or adult state criminal database. Even stranger, the same prints appeared on every sheet of blot paper. Same placement, same angle. As though a child's hand had pressed them there over and over. Maybe not all at once, maybe over decades. In 1993, Deputy Archivist Lydia Kress conducted a midnight transfer of the folder from one cabinet to another. She reported, resistance, as if the folder weighed more than its pages, heavier than paper, heavier than logic. That was her final entry. She never returned to the archive. Her resignation letter, typed and unsigned, contained a single sentence: if he isn't assigned, he can't be processed. Attempts to microfilm the folder failed. Every image came back blank except for that same black line on the linen tab. Digitization no better. Each scan returned a repeating error message embedded deep into the corrupted data. Awaiting outcome. Awaiting outcome. Awaiting outcome. No metadata explained it. No software could override it. Today the file sits locked in a steel drawer beneath Collection Y. Access requires 2 director-level signatures, one of which belongs to someone who hasn't worked there in over 20 years. On the steel face of that drawer, barely visible, unless you're looking for it, is an etched phrase not found anywhere else in the Finch archive. Don't close the file. He's still being written. He was fostered, returned, reassigned, incarcerated, forgotten, but never buried. Nowhere in the state system does he die. His file never closes. His age never changes. And somewhere beneath the cracked foundation of an Indiana courthouse, a fire-blackened ledger still lists his name. So what was he? A boy? Misplaced? A clerical error? A ghost in the machine? Or something created by the machine, fed by documents, shuffled by sleepy clerks, sustained by a system that remembered too much and forgot how to let go. This isn't a ghost story. It's a story about what happens when a system refuses to forget. And the boy, it never should have touched in the first place. If you're still with me at this hour, thank you. Like the video if it stirred something in you. Subscribe if you want more stories history tried to bury. And if you're still watching, tell me, where are you listening from? What time is it? Because sometimes the only comfort in a story like this is knowing you're not the only one awake.